Before we dive into this incredible story, make sure you're part of our journey. Hit that subscribe button, turn on notifications, and get ready for a story that will leave you thinking. And if you love inspiring tales, a like goes a long way. Look at that pathetic old man pretending he belongs here. The words cut through the ambient piano music like shattered glass. In that moment, the elegant restaurant became two different worlds, one of privilege, another of quiet dignity. None of them noticed the man in the corner booth lowering his menu. The elderly gentleman adjusted his worn but clean blazer, his weathered hands trembling slightly as he reached for his water glass. Around him, designer clothes rustled as heads turned to stare. Chandeliers cast golden light across crystal and silver, illuminating both the finest champagne and the cruelest smiles. The young executive's laughter grew louder with each whisper, performing for an audience that responded with uncomfortable smiles. Something shifted in the atmosphere when the man in the corner booth stood up. There was a quiet confidence in his movement, unhurried yet deliberate. The restaurant's soft lighting caught the unmistakable profile that had commanded both screens and respect for decades. As Robert Downey Jr. moved across the room, conversations fell silent. What happened next would be shared thousands of times, but it would never capture the power of actually being there, of witnessing what real class looks like when status and kindness collide. If this moment made you feel something, imagine what's coming next. Hit that like button and stay with us. Subscribe now. Harold Miller had been coming to Skyview Restaurant every year on his anniversary, even after Martha passed away 3 years ago. 47 years of marriage deserved to be honored, and this view of the city had been her favorite. He'd saved for months to afford this dinner, carefully withdrawing from his modest pension. His suit had seen better decades, but it was clean and pressed, just as Martha would have wanted. The maître d' had hesitated before seating him at a small table near the kitchen, far from the floor-to-ceiling windows where the city sparkled like Martha's eyes once did. The group of young professionals had noticed him immediately. Their Rolex watches caught the light as they gestured in his direction, their voices just loud enough to reach him. Is this place letting in just anyone now? One woman in a red designer dress asked, not bothering to lower her voice. The leader of their group, a man in his 30s with slicked back hair and a custom suit, made a show of looking disgusted. Probably spent his life savings just to pretend he's somebody, he said, drawing cruel laughter from his companions. Harold pretended not to hear as he carefully unfolded his napkin across his lap. His ears might be failing him in his 70s, but even he could make out their mockery. The young server assigned to his table, barely older than his youngest granddaughter, approached with obvious discomfort, her eyes darting between Harold and the group of wealthy patrons whose bill would surely dwarf his own. "I'm sorry," she whispered while pouring his water, though what exactly she was apologizing for remained unspoken. "Don't worry about it, dear," Harold said gently. "I've lived long enough to know what matters." He ordered the cheapest entree on the menu, along with a single glass of wine, a small splurge to toast Martha. The laughter from the nearby table grew louder as he placed his order, with theatrical whispers about senior specials and early bird discounts. A few other diners shifted uncomfortably in their seats, but no one intervened. The cruel ritual of public humiliation continued, with the group's leader standing to mimic Harold's slightly stooped posture, drawing more laughter from his companions. Phones emerged to capture the comedy, though several faces in the restaurant showed quiet disapproval. In the corner booth, partially hidden by an elegant arrangement of orchids, sat Robert Downey Jr. He'd chosen this restaurant for its discretion and exceptional cuisine, wanting a quiet dinner before tomorrow's film premiere. The staff had seated him away from other patrons as requested, but the commotion had become impossible to ignore. He watched the scene unfold with growing attention, his expression shifting from casual observation to focused concern. The actor set down his phone, his fingers drumming lightly on the table as he observed the elderly man's quiet dignity contrasted against the group's escalating cruelty. Downey had lived enough lives in his 50-plus years to recognize the difference between people who had something and people who were something. The distinction was growing clearer by the second as he watched the elderly gentleman endure the mockery with a straight back and steady gaze. When the group leader mimicked the old man's walk, something changed in Downey's expression, a hardening around the eyes, a slight tightening of the jaw. Anyone familiar with his roles would recognize it. The look that came before Tony Stark delivered justice, before Sherlock Holmes solved the case. He signaled to his server with a subtle gesture, asking a brief question that made the young man's eyes widen in surprise. Things are about to take a turn. Don't miss what happens next. Subscribe, like our video, and keep watching. Harold's hands trembled slightly as he raised the wine glass to his lips. "Happy anniversary, Martha," he whispered, the ruby liquid catching the light. The group nearby had grown louder, their mockery evolving into a grotesque form of entertainment for themselves. The young executive stood again, this time pulling at his blazer sleeves and hunching over in an exaggerated impression. "I fought in 2 wars so you could enjoy that champagne," he mimicked in a wavering voice, drawing howls of laughter from his companions. A woman in the group pointed her manicured finger directly at Harold, not even attempting to be subtle. "Look at his shoes. Did he walk here from the last century?" The kitchen door swung open, and Harold's modest meal arrived, a simple fish dish that was the most affordable option on the menu. This, too, became fodder for ridicule. "Probably ordered the fish because he can suck the bones for calcium. Medicare doesn't cover everything, you know," someone jeered, and the executive pretended to remove dentures in a grotesque pantomime. Harold closed his eyes briefly, steadying himself. The photograph of Martha in his wallet seemed to burn against his chest. She had always told him that dignity wasn't something others could take from you, only something you could surrender. His weathered hands remained steady as he carefully cut a piece of fish, determined to honor her memory with the quiet strength she had always loved in him. The restaurant manager approached the noisy table, his expression professionally neutral, though strain showed around his eyes. "Sir, I'd appreciate if you could keep your voice down. We have other guests trying to enjoy their meals," he said to the executive, who responded with a dismissive wave, and a crisp $100 bill slipped into the manager's pocket. "We're celebrating a big deal. Surely you don't mind a little fun," the executive replied, his voice dripping with the confidence of someone used to buying compliance. The manager's eyes flicked to Harold, then away quickly, a moral calculation made and lost in seconds. With a tight nod, he retreated, choosing profit over principle. Several patrons shifted uncomfortably in their seats, some exchanging troubled glances. A couple at a nearby table requested their check early, unable to enjoy their meal amid the cruelty. The young server attending Harold approached him again, her eyes downcast. "Can I get you anything else, sir?" she asked softly, positioning herself as if to shield him from view. Before Harold could answer, the executive called out he might need a bib, or maybe a doggy bag for the retirement home. The server's shoulders tensed, but she remained beside Harold's table, a small act of defiance that didn't go unnoticed by the man watching from the corner booth. Robert Downey Jr. stood up, his movement deliberate yet casual. The maitre d' noticed immediately, hurrying over with concerned attentiveness that came from recognizing a celebrity who could make or break their establishment's reputation with a single social media post. "Mr. Downey, is everything all right with your meal?" the man asked, his voice low. "The food's excellent," Downey replied, his eyes still on Harold and the group tormenting him. "But the atmosphere has become a bit toxic." The word hung in the air between them. The maitre d' followed his gaze and swallowed nervously. "I apologize for the disturbance. Would you prefer a more private table? Perhaps in our exclusive section upstairs? The desperation in his voice was evident. Losing a high-profile customer would be disastrous. Downey shook his head slowly. That won't be necessary. There was something in his tone that made the maitre d' pause. The quiet determination of a man who had made a decision. The actor's reputation for transformation wasn't limited to his roles. Those who knew him were aware of his journey from self-destruction to redemption. The way he now looked at the elderly man being mocked carried the weight of someone who understood the difference between arrogance and worth. Actually, Downey continued, reaching for his glass of water, I think I'll just stretch my legs. With that, he stepped away from his secluded table and began walking across the restaurant floor, every movement radiating purpose. The executive, mid-mockery, hadn't noticed him yet, but others had. Conversations quieted. Phones discreetly emerged. The atmosphere shifted like air pressure before a storm. This story is only getting deeper. What would you do in this situation? Comment below, and let's talk. The first person to recognize Robert Downey Jr. was a woman at a table near the entrance. Her sharp intake of breath caught the attention of her companion, whose eyes widened in recognition. A ripple effect spread through the restaurant as heads turned and whispers erupted. The executive, still performing his cruel impression, remained oblivious until one of his companions frantically tapped his arm, hissing, "Jason, stop. It's Robert Downey Jr." Jason turned, his mocking smile freezing as Downey approached Harold's table. The restaurant had fallen into the particular hush that accompanies celebrity sightings, a mixture of excitement, disbelief, and the collective breath-holding of people witnessing something unexpected. Phones recorded discreetly and not so discreetly as Downey stopped beside Harold's table. "Excuse me, sir," Downey said, his voice carrying in the newfound silence. "I hope I'm not interrupting your dinner." Harold looked up, momentary confusion giving way to recognition. "Not at all," he replied with quiet dignity. "I couldn't help noticing you're dining alone, and I was wondering if I might join you," Downey continued, gesturing to the empty chair across from Harold. "That is, if you don't mind the company." The elderly man's eyes crinkled slightly. "I'd be honored," he said simply, his weathered hand indicating the chair. Downey sat down across from Harold with the ease of someone comfortable in any situation. The contrast was striking, the Hollywood star in his perfectly tailored casual attire across from the elderly man in his dated suit. Yet something about their postures, the direct way they looked at each other, created an immediate sense of equality. "Robert Downey Jr., the actor said, extending his hand. "Harold Miller," the older man replied, his grip firm despite his age. "Though I suspect you've given the restaurant quite a story to tell." Downey smiled, a genuine expression that reached his eyes. "I think you were doing that just fine before I arrived." He glanced toward Jason's table, where the group sat frozen in shock and growing mortification. Some people never learn that respect isn't determined by the price tag on your clothes. Harold's eyes held a lifetime of wisdom. "My wife, Martha, used to say that dignity costs nothing to give, but everything to take away." "Martha sounds like a wise woman," Downey said, lifting his water glass in a subtle toast. 47 years of marriage to her was my life's greatest fortune," Harold replied, a flicker of grief crossing his features. "Today's our anniversary. She passed 3 years ago, but we came here every year, so I still do." The restaurant remained abnormally quiet, every nearby table now invested in this unexpected scene. Jason and his group huddled in uncomfortable silence, their earlier bravado evaporated. One woman appeared to be deleting something from her phone with frantic movements. Downey signaled to Harold's server, who approached with wide eyes darting between the two men. "We're going to need a bottle of your finest champagne," he said, then looked at Harold. "If that's all right with you, I think an anniversary deserves a proper celebration." Martha would have liked that. Harold nodded, a hint of mischief in his eyes as he added, "She was quite a fan of your earlier work, especially Chaplin." "A woman of excellent taste," Downey laughed, then turned to the server. "And could we get 2 of whatever the chef recommends? I'm suddenly not in the mood for a solo dinner." The young server smiled broadly. "Right away, Mr. Downey." She hurried away, but not before shooting a vindicated glance toward Jason's table. Downey leaned forward slightly. "You know, Harold, I've had my share of ups and downs. There was a time when people looked at me the way those folks were looking at you. Not because of my clothes, but because of my mistakes. I learned that true worth isn't in what you have, or even what you've done, but in who you decide to be each day." Harold nodded. "Martha and I never had much. School teachers don't retire rich, but we had dignity, and each other." "To Martha," Downey said as the champagne arrived. He stood up, glass raised, voice carrying throughout the restaurant. "And to the kind of wealth that doesn't fit in bank accounts." Harold rose slowly to his feet, his eyes bright. Around them, other diners began standing too, glasses raised in spontaneous respect. Even the restaurant staff paused in their duties, caught in the moment's gravity. The only people who remained seated were Jason and his group, their faces flushed with embarrassment as phones throughout the restaurant captured everything. "It's not over yet. The best part is coming. Make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss it." The evening transformed into something Harold could never have anticipated. He and Downey shared stories over their meal. Harold about his years teaching history and raising 3 children with Martha. Downey about his career's resilience and the importance of second chances. Their conversation flowed naturally, punctuated by genuine laughter and moments of reflection. Other diners occasionally approached with respectful deference, not for autographs, but to offer Harold their well wishes on his anniversary. Jason and his group eventually paid their bill and left, avoiding eye contact with anyone. As they hurried out, Jason glanced back once, meeting Downey's gaze. Something passed between them. A lesson delivered without words. The actor gave a small nod that somehow managed to be both forgiveness and warning, and Jason quickly looked away. The restaurant manager appeared at their table, profusely apologizing to both men for the earlier disturbance. "Your meals are on the house tonight, gentlemen," he insisted, his earlier moral failing weighing visibly on him. Downey shook his head. "That's not necessary, but I believe Harold's table should be moved." He gestured toward the prime spot by the windows. "An anniversary deserves the best view in the house, doesn't it?" By midnight, the story had spread across social media. Videos showed the moment Downey sat with Harold, their toast, and the restaurant rising in respect. Hashtags emerged. #Dignity Matters and #Real Heroes. Comments poured in by the thousands, many sharing similar experiences of ageism and class prejudice, others expressing how the story had changed their perspective on how they treated people. Downey's simple act of respect became something larger, a cultural moment that transcended celebrity gossip. Morning shows picked up the story, discussing not just what happened, but why it resonated with so many. In a world where worth is often measured by material success, one commentator noted, we witnessed something primal, the human need for dignity recognized. Harold's granddaughter called him the next morning, her voice trembling with emotion. "Grandpa, you're everywhere online. Mr. Downey's team reached out to us. They're establishing a scholarship in Grandma's name at the school where you both taught." It's for students who demonstrate exceptional character. For the restaurant, the incident became transformative. The manager implemented a strict policy against any form of harassment or discrimination. Staff members spoke of the night with reverence, particularly the young server who had tried to shield Harold. "It changed how I see my job," she told a local reporter. "I realized that sometimes standing up for someone is more important than keeping the peace." 1 week later, Harold returned to his modest home after a doctor's appointment to find a package on his porch. Inside was a framed photograph of him and Martha from their 40th anniversary, one he thought had been lost during a move. A note accompanied it. "Harold, some moments deserve to be preserved. True wealth walks among us unrecognized. Thank you for the reminder. R.D.J." How Downey had found the photo remained a mystery, but to Harold it was less important than what it represented: respect that transcended circumstance, dignity that outlasted loss. He placed it on his mantel beside his favorite picture of Martha. That evening, as social media continued to share and discuss what happened, Jason posted a public apology. It wasn't the carefully crafted statement of a PR team, but the raw acknowledgement of someone facing an uncomfortable truth about themselves. "I've spent years measuring worth by wealth," he wrote. "One dinner changed everything I thought I knew about value." For Harold, life returned mostly to normal, teaching his chess club at the retirement community, visiting his grandchildren, honoring Martha's memory in quiet ways. But something had shifted in how people treated him and how he carried himself. His story had become a reminder that dignity isn't granted by circumstance, but by recognizing the inherent worth in each person. And in Hollywood, Robert Downey Jr. continued his work, declining interviews about that night. When pressed by reporters, he simply smiled and said, "Some lessons don't need explanation. Just witnesses." Wow, what a story. If this moved you, imagine what else we have for you. Hit that like button, drop a comment, and let us know what you think.